Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Red Game Typicon video we're going to be discussing the PlayStation 4 Neo specifications. In a couple of days there is that very important Sony conference where we're expecting a couple of key announcements from Sony. The first is the PlayStation 4 Slim, which totally doesn't exist until it is announced, honest, and the Neo, also known as the PS4K. Now there have been a bunch of the system specifications leaked online, and of course we've already had a deep analysis of those specifications, including showing off the internal documentation which Sony would actually be shipping off to developers along with the developer kit. But there was some speculation that the final retail specifications of the Neo will indeed see a bit of a bump. Now the reason behind that is, well, pretty obvious. The PlayStation 4 Neo is going to be up against, about a year later, depending on the exact release time schedule and all of that, against the Scorpio, which is going to be considerably more powerful given from what we've learned about both machines. Now the PS4K is looking at putting out about 4.2 teraflops of computing power compared to the Scorpio 6, so that is a considerable difference. But there is a chap by the name of Daniel Ahmed, also known as ZHugeX, who does have a fairly reasonable history of leaking stuff. And he says on Twitter, "I think the people who are expecting the PS4 Neo to have a huge spec boost over what it previously leaked are going to be disappointed." And that, of course, is a pretty good indication that we're going to see very similar specifications. Now, he also adds, however, that a Japanese company has created a demo on a new engine running at 4K 30 FPS and 1080p at 90 FPS for the PS4 Neo. Now, both of those are incredibly important numbers, because with the first, the 4K at 30, that's obviously for, well, 4K televisions, which means that in a theoretical world, games should look absolutely beautiful running at 4K. It's obviously a lot of extra pixels on screen. What the quality of those pixels is going to be, and if we're going to see an inherent boost in visual fidelity, for example, we're going to see nicer draw distances, better quality lighting on top of that, or whether we're just going to see additional detail because of the higher internal rendered resolution, your guess is as good as mine. We're going to have to wait to see some actual content, and ideally, of course, we're going to see it in our homes. But the 1080p 90 is primarily for PlayStation VR. And let's face it, there have been some rumours, and I don't necessarily know if I buy into them 100%, that say that the regular vanilla PS4 does not run PSVR that well. And really, to get the full experience, you need the PS4K/Neo. Once again, I don't know if I buy into that, and I'm going to take them with a grain of salt until we actually finally get PSVR, we get the PS4, and we get the PS4K, and we run a bunch of tests with a bunch of games. Then we can start saying, yeah, okay, there is a large discrepancy between the two platforms. Of course, high frame rates are very important for virtual reality, but because you have to have a high frame rate, it means that you've got a lot less rendering time per frame of animation, which inherently means you have lower visual quality compared to, let's say, if you were targeting 1080p 60 or even 1080p 30, which you can get away with on a traditional television. Now, there have been some other rumours, which we've discussed before, that Sony's own developers, that would be the first party developers, although no names were dropped, that, so for example Naughty Dog or Guerrilla Games, those type of folks, have actually requested Sony to give them more memory. So that could be one of the changes we're going to see for the final system. It's also possible we could see a small clock speed increase for the PS4 Neo's GPU, and it's possible we could see the same for the CPU. What type of clock could we expect? Well, honestly, it depends. Really, it comes down to what they're comfortable with, in terms of like the yields, what they're comfortable with in terms of heat, and what they're comfortable with in terms of, well, you know, how many of their chips are going to be able to run at that clock speed with the cooling that they need, and also, and probably the most important, without increasing the amount of noise of the console. And Sony are going to have to look for the sweet spot. For example, and I'm just pulling out numbers here, it could be that the Neo runs absolutely fine at 911 MHz and maybe goes up to 940 without too much issue, but if you start going over, let's say, 960, the power requirements spike a lot more and it puts out a lot more heat. So by the time you go from like 940 MHz to 980, just for example, the extra power that the system's sucking from the wall socket and the extra heat it's putting out just aren't worth that extra few megahertz and extra tiny little bit of extra performance. Ultimately, we can only wait and see, but it's quite an interesting little rumour if nothing else. That said, definitely stick with us because we will be covering the PlayStation meeting. Kind of looking forward to seeing what the system is going to look like visually. To be honest, personally I'm expecting a very PlayStation 4 design, but maybe a little bigger, just based upon the fact that the system obviously will have a whole bunch more internals. We all know that the PS4K is going to have a considerably beefed up GPU, it's going to have a more powerful CPU, but the memory capacity in terms of the amount of memory soldered onto the board is going to be the same. It's just going to have a larger amount available to the game if a game's running in Neo mode. So in short, it's going to have an extra 512 megabytes on top of the PlayStation 4's memory, regular memory reserves. So I can see why developers would be uncomfortable with that amount of RAM, but ultimately we're just going to have to wait and see what Sony finally reveals the system to be. With all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.